So, in this video I am going to talk about Pierro. Who is he, what do we know about him, and is he the one behind the Fatui plan? I'm going to talk about Pierro, aka the Jester, who is a very important figure in Genshin lore, one of the main villains, and who is also described as the director of the Fatui. First I'll discuss everything we know about him for sure, so that means everything that's confirmed in the game, and then I'll talk about some other theories including his possible role in the future story. Before you watch this video, I suggest that you watch some sort of explanation of the basics of Fatui, if you don't know that, and maybe also some quick recaps on the Harbingers, because there is a lot of things that aren't directly about Pierro that I won't go much into. And I say this in every single video of this type, but this is just a theory. I unfortunately can't read the developers' minds, so I just have to theorize and let them cook. All I say in this video is simply my interpretation and opinion, so if you disagree with anything I say, please tell me why in the comments down below. Now let's start talking about everything we know about Pierro, aka the Jester. So as you probably already know, all the Fatui Harbingers, including Pierro, are inspired by the Commedia dell'arte, which in case you don't know is a type of Italian theatre. In the Commedia he often represents a sad clown that's in love with Bina, who usually breaks his heart and leaves him for Arlecchino. But gradually the character of Pierro evolves from the Jester to an avatar of the lawless. So far, from everything we know, it doesn't seem like any of this information is relevant to the actual game. And as we have seen in the past, Genshin often likes to do the exact opposite of what the Commedia implies, which in this case could for example be the fact that Pierro is usually played without a mask in the Commedia, but in Genshin he is one of the few Harbingers that actually wears a mask. And he is the type of character who doesn't really seem to be swayed by something like love, and especially not for someone like Bina, who doesn't seem to have any significant relationship with neither him nor Arlecchino. So right now, the collection seems to be more symbolic than anything. Now let's get into the actual in-game lore of Pierro. I'll start by saying the basics, and then we will get down to the specifics. So he's the director of the Fatui, as confirmed in the Winter Night's Lazo trailer, and it doesn't seem like he counts as one of the Harbingers, because of the way he's displayed in the voice lines of the Harbingers, and because of the way it's stated in the Winter Night's Lazo trailer. He is the very first member of the organization, and he has recruited several other Harbingers, but more on that later. The first time that we have ever seen him was in the Winter Night's Lazo trailer, where he was revealed alongside the other Harbingers. But the first time we have actually heard about him in the story was way back in the version 1.1 during the Unreconciled Stars event. He didn't actually play any important role in that story, but he was mentioned by Scaramouche while he was investigating a meteor at Musgrave. He was supposed to be responsible for sending him to Liyue. But Scaramouche says the now famous line about the stars and sky being a gigantic hoax and lie. He mentions that he thinks that the Jester has foreseen this discovery that he would make. Meaning that Pierro probably either has some ability to foresee the future, or is just that knowledgeable, or he simply somehow already knows about the stars and the sky being fake. Which seems likely considering that both Scaramouche and Dottore seem to know about it too. But now onto the full story of the Jester. From the Pale Flame artifact set, namely the Mocking Mask, and several other sources like Arlecchino's character story, we learn that the Jester, who laughs in the face of fate, was a royal mage in Khaenri'ah during the Eclipse dynasty, which was the final dynasty of Khaenri'ah before the Cataclysm. In the version 3.3 Archon Quest, in version of Genesis, we learn that he actually lived with the Abyssal sibling for a time, according to Scaramouche. According to the Mocking Mask, he failed to earn the favor of the ruler, probably meaning King Irmin, and he failed to stop him and the sages from tearing away the Veil of Sin, which brought to them divine wrath, destruction and foolishness. Foolishness mentioned here is especially interesting to me, since Fatui literally means fools in Latin. This probably talks about the event that triggered the Khaenri'ah Cataclysm 500 years ago. From the latest Dainsleif quest, we have learned that the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah may have had a hand in this as well. Then he instead became a fool or fatus, who devotes himself to the Tsaritsa, who according to him understands his pain. He says that he wants the Fatui to put on their masks in mockery of the world as they go forth and rewrite the rules of destiny in their fight against the heavenly principles. Which to me sounds a lot like the Loom of Fate, but I doubt the Jester is actually connected to all of that. What I think is happening is that the Fatui are trying to achieve the same thing as the Abyss Order with their Loom of Fate, but by using different means, such as the power of the 7 Gnosis. From the looks of it, he was one of the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns who were cursed with immortality, and that's probably also why he joined the Tsaritsa and established the Fatui. In terms of his power level, we barely know anything aside from the fact that he was a royal mage in Khaenri'ah, so he probably can fight, and he also seems to be highly respected amongst the ranks of the Fatui, so I imagine that he is probably not weak by any means. From everything we know so far, it's really difficult to say if he's actually the one who came up with the plan of collecting the Gnosis and such, instead of the Tsaritsa, because from the way everyone talks about her, she seems more passive, and it at least to me seems like Pierro is actually the one running everything. Some people already suspected for a long time that Pierro is actually the one manipulating Tsaritsa and using her for his goals, not the other way around. It's an interesting situation, because if he is really following the Tsaritsa, then he's probably the first Khaenri'an that witnessed the cataclysm and still serves under a god, even though someone like Dainsleif or Clothar hated the gods. But this is all just a theory. If we take a look at his design, we can see that he has star-shaped pupils, which symbolize his pure-blooded Khaenri'an origins. This is one of the reasons we believe that he is suffering from the same curse of immortality as Dainsleif, apart from the fact that he has also lived for over 500 years at this point. He also has a mask that covers half of his face, the same way Dainsleif masks does, if we can even call that a mask. Anyway, we don't know for sure if half of his body is cursed the same way as Dainsleif's, because we have so far only seen him twice, in the Winter Night's Lazo and the Arlecchino's animated short, and in both of these, he was hidden behind a coat. So far, I think that we have heard him in the game only once, and that was in the inversion of Genesis Archon Quest, where we heard his conversation with Scaramouche when he was trying to recruit him. In the lines from the playable Fatui Harbingers, including the Wanderer, Arlecchino says that he is the original Harbinger, but much about him still remains a mystery, and that he recognized her Khaenri'an background with ease. Tartaglia says that he was the first Fatui Harbinger, and that he only appears on important occasions. Child doesn't really care about his accomplishments, and is loyal only to the Tsaritsa. The Wanderer tells us that Pierro is a survivor of Khaenri'ah, and that he knows very little about him besides that fact. He says that Pierro seems to want something from him though, and in the past he assigned him many important tasks, including trips to the Abyss. I wonder what that something he wants from him could be. One of the first things that came to mind was his power to withstand being in the Abyss, or the technology with which he was created, since it supposedly hailed from Khaenri'ah as well, but this is all just speculation on my part. Now let's talk about how Pierro recruited some of the Harbingers. He went to the Sumeru Desert in pursuit of a scholar called Zandik, who was expelled from the Academia because of heresy. We later learned that Zandik was Dottore's older name, when he was still a scholar in Sumeru. After Pierro found him, he agreed to join the Fatui because they promised they would support his research to create beings able to surpass the gods. Pierro gave him the title of Il Dottore, aka the Doctor. He also recruited the Crimson Witch of Flames, or Rosenkruška Lowfolter, and gave her the title of La Signora. He gave her a cryo delusion, so that she can suppress her intense flames, because at that point in time, she was basically in the form of liquid fire and had flames running through her body. About 400 years ago, Pierro sent Dottore to infiltrate Inazuma and sabotage Tatarasuna, where he met a humanoid puppet. Dottore infiltrated the Mikage furnace, and upon finishing the mission, he killed the puppet's friend and deceived it, only to later introduce it to Pierro. If the puppet were to prove its usefulness, they would make it one of them, and if not, they would dispose of it. The puppet-making techniques had their roots in Khaenri'ah, and his nature as a creation of the Electro Archon made him all the more special. Pierro decided to make him one of them, and later named him Scaramouche. He often sent him on tasks related to the Abyss, because of his tardiness. Since we learned about the fact that the Jester lived with our sibling from Scaramouche, it seems to be something Pierro is willing to discuss, so maybe it was important to him. As we have recently seen in Arlecchino's animated short, after he already recruited Rosa and Scaramouche, and Capitan was already in Fatui as well, he found an orphan from the House of the Harv that killed the previous Fatui Harbinger called Kursabina. The Tsaritsa pardoned her crimes, and she was appointed in the previous Harbinger's place. He then gave her the name Arlecchino. We also know that when he learned about her origins, he allowed her to ask him 5 important questions. He told her that she was a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty, and that he was surprised to see that they haven't gone extinct. He also told her that he served during the Eclipse dynasty, and that if she wants to learn more about that period of time, she should read the book called Hellbrando Innamorato, or Perinheri as it's known nowadays. We also know that when Tartaglia became a Harbinger, Pierro was the one who pinned on him his Electro Delusion. He is also probably responsible for recruiting other Harbingers except Child, but we don't know that for sure. Currently we know that he is trying to create a demand for delusions, and we know that he was the one who planned the Fatui's actions in Inazuma. He sent Nathan to infiltrate the army of the Watatsumi resistance and sabotage their efforts. After they were exposed, Pierro recalled them from Yashiori Island. But that's basically all the factual information we know about him so far. So now let's get into the theories surrounding Pierro. As for his possible identity, because of the recent bedtime story Archon quest, as I already mentioned in my previous video, there is an interesting theory to be made about him being Hroptatyr, aka the Wise. As I already said, we know that Pierro was the royal mage of Khaenri'ah, and he said in the Veterinite Fossil trailer that the sages think they are all-knowing, but he says that we alone, probably meaning the Fatui under his rule, are wise to the virtue in those acts of folly. He ironically calls himself the Jester and the Fool, which seems to be kind of his thing. You know, to call himself and others ironical names, like the way he named his whole organization Fatui, aka the Fools. So I think that if we take this to the next level, he could actually originally be called the Wise, and call himself instead the Fool, because of what happened in Khaenri'ah. Even in the lore is described how he could not compare to the sages of Canria, so he shall instead become a fool. In Norse mythology, Hrobtatyr is another name for Odin, who is in Genshin represented by King Irmin, who is also closely connected to Pierro as far as we know. In Chinese it also translates to sage, which could fit this theory quite well too. Personally, I don't think it's very likely to be the case, since he himself seems to have wanted to stop the king and the others from starting the Canrian cataclysm, and Daitzliff says that none of the sinners tried to stop it. So I think it would be interesting if this turns out to be true, and it would be kind of funny, with how he calls himself the fool and all, but yeah, I don't think it's happening. Anyway, I think it's fair to suspect that he is someone inspired by Norse mythology, since that seems to be the case for all the Canrians we know so far, so that would make a lot of sense. It's also pretty weird that someone like Daitzliff hasn't mentioned Pierro at all yet, which to me doesn't make much sense, since he's usually the one who name drops all of these important Canrians, and Pierro has got to be one of them. So I think that the theories that he has already been mentioned, just not as Pierro, since that definitely wasn't his original name, make a lot of sense. It's likely that we will see a lot of him in Snezhnaya, as he will probably play a big part in the final chapters of the story, surrounding the Gnosis and the Fatui's grand plan to rebel against the Heaven. I also wouldn't be surprised if he played a role in the Canrian chapter at the end, if we end up getting one. The Fatui constellation wheel also symbolizes the Jester, either as the crying mask on the left side, or on the very top of it. In the first case it doesn't tell us much, and in the second case he could be the final Fatui boss we faced in Teyvat chapter of the Genshin story, but this is all very heavy speculation. At the end, I'd like to say that there were a lot of theories in the past about Pierro being somehow some way related to Kaja Albrich, mostly him being either his father or his grandfather or his grand-grandfather, etc. But all of these, at least to me right now, don't seem very possible. Because Daitzliff says that Kaja is a descendant of the Abyss Order's founder, meaning Clothar Albrich, who doesn't seem to be connected to Pierro in any way from what we know, and to me I just don't see any similarities between the two of them, so I have no reason to suspect that they are related. But that will be it for this not so long video. I tried to make it as informative as possible without it being too much of a speculation, because we truly don't know as much information about characters like these. So I hope you liked it and that it was easy to follow, and I'll see you in the next one.